Well, hello, free people of the Rocky Mountain region. This is Brandon from Free State, Colorado, and I hope you're doing well. Well, here we are in 2026, and there's a lot of questions about Colorado's economy. We want a good economy with high paying jobs, great employers, so we can have economic opportunity for ourselves, our families, and just a thriving place to live. That's what we, of course, really want here in Colorado. But unfortunately, the policies of our government, these greedy politicians, are pushing Colorado into the wrong direction. So I want to do a little bit of a deep dive today. We're going to look at some legislative services documents here, coming through what the economic forecast is for 2026. There's a lot of really interesting insights in there related to even the firearms tax, to the marijuana tax, to regulations. We're going to talk a lot about different things going on here in Colorado. And then I want to kind of end up the video here talking about the Colorado Chamber of Commerce and their fears and worries about what our state legislature, which is dominated by Democrats, might do to make Colorado's situation even worse. So let's take a look here with coloradopolitics.com. This will be our starting point. January 5th, 2026. No Tabor refunds this year, as Colorado Governor Jared Polis warns of tight fiscal outlook. Yep, we got a huge spending problem in Colorado. State legislators spending more money than they have on programs we don't need. Governor Jared Polis on Friday submitted revised budget requests for the next two fiscal years, calling for new public safety spending, changes to Medicaid growth, and renewed efforts to privatize Pinnacle Assurance. Notably, the governor said Colorado residents won't get refunds from the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, Tabor. And that's true. The government doesn't have enough money to refund us this, and that's kind of a good thing, which we'll get into here. The new request totaled $48.6 billion, with $18.2 billion in general funds for fiscal year 25 to 26, and $50.5 billion for 2026 to 2027. Wow. Polis said the state will be about $308 million below the Tabor cap, meaning Coloradans will not receive a refund in 2026. So Tabor does limit the amount of money that our government can collect from taxpayers. Whenever the government exceeds that level, they refund it back to us. If the government's not collecting enough of that money, well, then there's no refund. So that's really the story here. We'll dig in a little bit more here. However, the governor's office expects general fund revenue to grow in the 26 to 27 fiscal year, resulting in a Tabor surplus of $208 million. Polis said the state is expected to bring in approximately $87 million less, blaming the congressional budget bill known as H.R. 1 for that predicament. Polis again asked for a 13% budget reserve consistent with his budget request late 2025. This is a prudent proposal that reflects the current fiscal environment and the negative impacts that H.R. 1 imposes on Colorado, while maintaining a budget reserve that will help insulate us from a heightened recession risk, he said. Democrats have argued that Colorado's fiscal woes are the result of the actions of Republicans in Congress and the Trump administration. Republicans have countered that Colorado's fiscal challenges are a result of years of incessant government growth and overspending under the Democratic majority. Now, this is a really interesting article. Definitely dig into Pinnacle Assurance if you're not familiar with that. Of course, there's big competency issues with letting these violent criminals back on the streets. There's a lot here, and there's going to be a lot of topics to go through during this legislative session during the rest of this year. But I really want to stick on the budget, really want to talk about what our state economic outlook is going to look like. So Jared Polis gets a lot of his information from our legislative council staff. Now, Polis has some people of his own in his own office, but this is a fascinating document that our state government puts out, and I highly recommend you check it out. It's only 156 pages long, so nice light reading. But this is the economic and revenue forecast from December 2025. And so LCS is the Legislative Council staff. They're the nonpartisan full-time staff that works at our state capitol. So they put together reports all the time about how our state government is collecting and spending money and really provide a lot of great information that our legislators use to craft policy. So definitely check their stuff out. Very interesting stuff. We won't go through this whole 156 pages, of course. I got some highlights that we're going to check out, but just to give you an idea of everything they include in here. I mean, if you're interested in school finance, of course, Tabor, just general fund revenue, cash fund revenue, K through 12 enrollment projections, property tax assessed value projections, prison population, the economic outlook, all of it. There's lots and lots of information in here, very fascinating stuff. But we're really going to take a look at some of the key parts here that I think are extremely interesting here. So let's jump down to page 7, highlighted this here. Okay, this is the economic outlook. This is from our nonpartisan staff. So these people are not politicians. They're not necessarily Democrat activists or anything like that. So let's see what they have to say. I'm going to just read the highlighted section. Labor markets are showing signs of deterioration, with slow job growth reflecting weakness in both supply and demand. Faced with high uncertainty and costs, businesses have reduced hiring, while immigration policy has reduced the supply of available workers. On the whole, the Colorado economy appears slightly weaker than the nation. As the state's unemployment claims rise, real retail spending falls, and the housing market weakens. So that's the true story there, folks. Our economy's not in the best shape. There's lots of reasons for it. We'll dig into some of those reasons in this video, but I want to jump over here to this page. This is fascinating. So there's a whole section here about the general fund, and that's really the big pool of money that the state has in terms of their collections. But they say here, general fund revenue collections are expected to decline by 1.8%. A 31% decrease in corporate income tax revenue due to a slowing economy and tax cuts in the federal One Big Beautiful Bill Act will wipe away modest increases in sales tax and individual income tax, and a 23% increase in insurance premium tax revenue. Wow. Now, one of the big highlights here is, folks, of course, Jared Polis and all the Democrats in our state government hate the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. This, I guess we'll call it OBA for the sake of ease, HR1. You may know it by there too. But I said this last year before we went to the special session. This was a win, a huge win for taxpayers, right? So you see an article like we just saw at coloradopolitics.com where they present that one-sided view of Jared Polis saying, oh my gosh, Colorado's suffering. Colorado's suffering because of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. But the reality is, folks, we have less corporate income tax revenue, less individual tax revenue. That is a good thing. It's great that Colorado taxpayers are paying less money into our state government. And of course, that's where some of the fiscal problems lie for our state. They're not collecting as much money as they could. Some of it is because of HR1, because we are paying less taxes are going to our state government. That is good. That is great. That's the one saving grace we have in terms of improving our economic condition, is lowering this tax burden on businesses and on individuals. So whenever you see these Democrats, and I hate to single them out, but that's who they are, criticize the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, HR1. You're going to hear it a lot during the legislative session. Just know that what they're really criticizing is the fact that they're not stealing more of your money. It's as simple as that, folks. Now, of course, that's one side of the story. The other side, I would say, is our state government is overregulating, overburdening businesses, and pushing out employers and pushing out high-income individuals out of the state due to their reckless and stupid policies, for lack of a better word, that are really hurting our economic climate, generally speaking. So I think that's key. And it's so interesting when you dig into these files put out by nonpartisan staff, you can kind of read between the lines there and get a different viewpoint. Now, of course, Tabor, right? We just saw that article. This is making all the headlines about how Coloradans aren't receiving their Tabor check. Now, we should, for many reasons. I think we should have Tabor refunds if the voters had made a better decision when referendum C was passed back in the day. If we held our government a little bit more accountable, we should definitely be paying less taxes and getting those Tabor refunds. I would love to see it, but this is the reality of it, folks. So this is page 35 here. Tabor Outlook. The state Tabor Outlook is presented in Table 10, which provides the history of the Tabor limit base and the referendum C cap. In fiscal year 24 to 25, state revenue subject to Tabor exceeded the referendum C cap, creating a state obligation for Tabor refunds to taxpayers in fiscal year 25-26. Good. That was last year, basically. Now, over this year, because of this tax decrease and this poor economic outlook, revenue is expected to fall short of the Tabor cap in fiscal year 2025 to 2026, before exceeding the cap again in 26, 27, 27, 28. They're projecting out years in the future. Who knows what's going to happen, right? So eventually we will get our Tabor refunds back according to these economic forecasts. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. All we really know is what's happening now. So you can see this graph here. So according to this, now Jared Polis's number was a little bit different, but very similar in that Colorado Politics article. But they reported here back in December that the fiscal year 25 to 26 was short about $465 million. So that means our state government collected less than what Tabor prevents them from collecting. So they could have collected another $465 million before hitting that Tabor cap. But because of these tax cuts, because of this poor economic outlook, Coloradans didn't pay as many taxes. That's ultimately a good thing, because they're only refunding money they've already taken from us. If they don't take that money from us to begin with, that's pretty much a win. Now you can see this line here with the referendum C cap. I've talked a lot about that with Natalie Menton. You can definitely check back on some of her old videos. She's a fantastic resource on that. If we had not passed referendum C back in the day, gosh, 20 something years ago, whenever that was, then this black line, this Tabor limit base, would have been what all of our Tabor refunds are based off of. We would have millions, hundreds of millions of dollars given back to the private citizens of Colorado, to businesses, to employers, to individual taxpayers. It would have been a great thing. Referendum C was a disaster, bad decision, and unfortunately, it's allowed these incredibly high collections of our tax money. But nonetheless, you can see kind of right here, there's a little spot, if you can see that, where fiscal year 26F does not reach up to that Tabor referendum C cap, which means there's not going to be a Tabor surplus. So fascinating stuff there. That's the reality of why we're not getting a Tabor refund. Of course, we still should if referendum C wasn't wasted. And I'm going to get into fees as well. Let's just jump into that now. So the Common Sense Institute had this report. Now it's a little bit dated, but it's still very, 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 very accurate in terms of what we're talking about today. This is a 2025 update from the Common Sense Institute Colorado, great organization out there. Snapshot of fees in Colorado, the 2025 update. So July 30th, 2025. So pretty recent, right? The reality is, folks, our state government our state legislators, to avoid Tabor, because they don't want to trigger that Tabor cap, right? They don't want to ask you for a tax increase for one, and they also want to collect money that's Tabor exempt. That's the two reasons why fees are so popular, in my opinion. Two of the reasons, at the very least. So this fee revenue by 2024 has reached $25.8 billion. $25.8 billion in Tabor exempt revenue being collected by our state government. Now, if all of that was underneath Tabor, which a big portion of it should be, according to the actual idea of what Tabor was passed on, we would be getting tax refunds like crazy. We'd be paying less income tax. Some people would be paying less property tax. We'd be getting refund checks in the mail, and we'd all be better off. But the fact that our state government is collecting $25.8 billion in fees to avoid Tabor for the most part is absolutely criminal in my mind. Absolutely and utterly insane. And you can really read this, of course, all the links at freestatecolorado.com. But I thought this part was really interesting because they show you where that money is going. So in fiscal year 2024, this higher education enterprises, I mean, look at that number. That is huge. $15 billion, $15.6 billion in fees. This Chase thing, which is the Colorado Healthcare Affordability and Sustainability Enterprise. Anytime you see enterprise, it's a fee, it's going to be Tabor exempt. But look at that, $5 billion there. Unemployment compensation, all these different little programs here, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, all these fees that they collect that are Tabor exempt. So this is money our state government is collecting that is not subject to that Tabor cap. So if they did, we would definitely not have to worry about that $464 million in terms of that Tabor revenue. So that's the rest of the picture there that I really wanted to get out, that, of course, our state government is playing a lot of games in terms of using fees rather than taxes, which means they're not having to refund that money back to us, right? So that's really interesting here, and I really want to get that out there. I also want to jump over here to some of what they're talking about with taxes for businesses. So they talk about sales tax, right? And sales tax is down, relatively speaking, at least from the forecast. It did grow. Sales tax revenue grew by 1.8% in fiscal year 24 to 25, was projected to post another year of slow growth before legislative adjustments. So our state legislature during the special session in August of 2025 really stuck it to businesses with House Bill 25B 1005. Check this out. Sales tax revenue is expected to grow 3.6% to $4.6 billion in fiscal year 25 to 26, with $27.6 million of that growth attributable to House Bill 25B 1005, which disallows retailers from retaining a portion of sales tax revenue to cover the costs of collecting sales tax revenue on behalf of the state, which began this year on January 1st, 2026. So that basically during the special session, the state legislature created a $27.6 million increase on businesses, tax increase on businesses, by saying you still have to collect sales tax money for the state, but we're not going to help you cover the cost of collecting that money. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's insane that they're asking these small businesses across the state to collect this money, to give it to the state. But of course, they got to do it with their own time, their own expense. They got to spend all their personnel, software, whatever they have to do to make that happen. And before, they were at least getting a little bit of coverage from the state government, but not anymore. So I thought that was really key point to bring up, because we really need to be very critical of our state government for doing that to businesses. Now, this is interesting too. This document has so much interesting things in it, but this firearms tax is something I did want to bring up. Proposition KK created the 6.5% tax on firearms. Certain firearm parts and ammunition, absolutely horrible, absolutely authoritarian and unconstitutional. Bad news. The voters made a terrible mistake by passing that in November 2024. This kind of breaks down where that money goes, which is pretty interesting. But I did want to point this out here. This was kind of interesting here because the money kind of tells you some of the story, right? Revenue from the firearms tax totaled $3.9 million in the final months of fiscal year 24 to 25, representing roughly an estimated 17,000 monthly gun sales, compared to the 36,400 average monthly gun sales posted for 2024. Wow. Lower than expected actuals are likely attributable to accelerated sales ahead of the new tax, right? People were buying more before the tax went into effect, potential non-compliance, and then shifting of purchases to origins other than Colorado. So people who are buying their ammunition maybe in Wyoming, other places, right? Maybe online and they're not whatever, and more than expected businesses under the $20,000 minimum threshold for application of the tax. So that's pretty interesting. Now, check this out. Colorado firearms sales through the first 4 months of 2025 grew by an estimated 32%, indicative of consumers. Indicative of consumers stocking up on firearm and ammunition sales before the implementation of the tax. So I thought that was interesting. Just a really an interesting point there of how many firearms people are buying and how this tax is working. So not a lot of takeaways from there, but just really wanted to share that with you because I thought it was fascinating. Now, this document also goes into schools, and I thought this was fascinating here as well. In terms of long-term enrollment trends, they talk about how there's this net migration policy, slower job growth, and this lack of international immigration due to securing the border has actually led to downward pressure on K through 12 enrollment. And I thought that was kind of telling. That's not something we hear about too often. The fact that it's going down, enrollment is going down, and a lot of it does have to do with education or with immigration, excuse me. But I thought this part was really fascinating because I'm a big proponent of getting your kids out of government schools. My goodness, every day in Colorado, it seems there's a new story about a teacher abusing children or being a predator on them or kids having, I mean, it's bad. It's just bad news in Colorado schools. So a lot of people are homeschooling, and this was pretty interesting. Check this out. Preliminary data indicates that enrollment in these programs, homeschool programs, in 25 through 26 has increased by about 2,800 individual students, or 18% compared to 24 to 25. That is massive, folks. 2,800 students, 18% increase of kids going through these homeschool programs. Wow. I mean, that's great news. That's exciting to me. I'm happy to hear that. That's really good stuff. So I thought that was fascinating. Now, of course, we're getting into some bad news here. You probably knew this from reading some of these news articles, but it's so interesting to see our state government, this nonpartisan legislative staff, really put this on the paper, right? Put this in their report. Colorado has the highest level of debt per capita of any state. As of 2024, averaging $90,540 in debt per person in 2024. The second highest state is California, which averages $86,000, while the national average is $61,660. Coloradans have had the highest level of debt per capita in every year since 2020. Colorado has the highest rate of mortgage debt, while being middle of the pack for auto and credit card debt. So mortgage debt is huge. A lot of it has to do with these inflated housing prices, which has been pretty interesting. Mortgage debt in Colorado ticked down slightly in 2024, while most states saw a modest increase. Very interesting stuff to see that. But yeah, that's part of the reason why Colorado has such a huge debt problem, and that's not necessarily good for the long-term financial feasibility of our state. So kind of they wrap it up here towards the end, and I really wanted to get this out there because you'll never hear our Democratic politicians mention this, but check this out. In addition, the outlook may benefit from tax policy stimulus enacted through OBA, a permanent extension of lower tax bracket rates, higher standard deductions for individual income taxpayers, and immediate tax deductions for businesses may boost consumer and business confidence more than anticipated in this forecast. So that's very interesting to see that this tax policy stimulus, by letting people and businesses keep more of their own money, has a positive impact on the economy. Well, yeah, we common sense, right? But to see a government report on that, I think is very interesting, and especially when our legislators, the Democrat legislators and the governor, don't want to have anything to do with it. So Fascinating stuff here, folks. Of course, one of the other big issues with the Colorado economy is unemployment. And relatively speaking, unemployment's not terrible, apparently, according to some of the reports. But I thought there was something that was interesting and worth talking about here. This is the denverpost.com. Colorado unemployment rate dips below 4% in November. Employers added 2,700 jobs in November, pushing the total to above 3 million. This was from January 8th, 2026, so very recent. Colorado's unemployment rate slipped below 4% in November for the first time since February 2024, bucking a trend of rising unemployment nationally, according to a delayed monthly update from the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. We're going to look at that report here in a second. The unemployment rate came in at 3.9%, down from 4.1% in September and 4.5% in November 2024. The rate had gotten as high as 4.8% last spring. The U.S. rate rose from 4.4 to 4.6%. Very interesting stuff here. Now, check this out. Colorado's lower rate reflected 25,000 fewer people describing themselves as unemployed, defined as those who are without a job but actively looking for one. So, of course, that's always one of the problems with these statistics with the unemployment rate. I mean, if you have people who are just saying, like, yeah, I don't have a job and I'm not looking for one, then that doesn't count towards the unemployment rate, which is kind of crazy, right? So you have 25,000 fewer people who are maybe some of them got jobs, don't get me wrong, maybe some of them left the state, maybe some of them retired. We just don't know. But they're not looking for a job, 25,000 less. I don't know that they all got jobs, but maybe some of them did. Pretty interesting stuff here. Um, Check this out. Let's actually look at the report here. This is from the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, talking about this here as well. So here's their household survey data. So this is really how they calculate this. Household survey data were not collected in October 2025 due to the last lapse in appropriations that were not collected retroactively. The November reference period was the week that contained the 12th of the month, a typical reference week. So there was the government shutdown, of course, at that time. According to the survey of households, the number of unemployed individuals decreased by 8,500 to 125,900. So there's still 125,900 people without jobs, went down by 8,400 people. Colorado's seasonally adjusted unemployment rate decreased by 0.2 percentage point over the same period to 3.9%. The national unemployment rate increased by 0.2 percentage point to 4.6%. So there's a lot of little numbers in here, but I think the raw numbers are really the most fascinating part. Colorado's labor force decreased by 9,400 people in November. So the labor force, that means people who are working, went down by 9,400 people. I thought that was not necessarily a good sign, right? I mean, for our economy, for having jobs, the labor force going down by 9,400 people, excuse me. The share of Coloradans participating in the labor force was 67% in November. This marks the lowest labor force participation rate since October 2020. So, it's so interesting because you read the Denver Post headline, right? It says, Colorado unemployment rate goes below, but then it's like, well, you actually read the report, you're like, well, yeah, there's 9,400 people less working, less people working. The labor participation rate is lower than it's been since 2020. So there's less people that are less Coloradans who are actually participating in the labor market, but less people who would say that they're looking for a job. So it's so interesting to see how these numbers can be manipulated, right? The number of individuals employed in Colorado decreased by 900 in November, which represents 64.4% of the state's 16-year-old plus population. Colorado's employment population ratio of 64% in November decreased 0.1 percentage point from September. The national employment population ratio was that. Okay, so interesting stuff. Employers in Colorado gained 2,700 non-farm payroll jobs, reaching over 3 million jobs. Private sector and payroll jobs increased by 1,500, while the government gained 1,200 jobs. How is the government gaining so many jobs, right? So when they say employers in Colorado and they say that 2,700 more jobs, 1,200 of them are government jobs. I mean, I don't think that should count because that's our tax money that they're using to fund these jobs, to pay these employees. So interesting stuff. They should really be talking about the private sector, generally speaking. But you can dig back into this and read the notes. It's pretty interesting stuff to see where Colorado's at and to see, um, see the real numbers there. So, maybe it's a good thing, generally speaking, where Colorado's at on some level. But there's other things that should sound some alarms, including this article that the Denver Post also put out recently. Is Colorado at risk of becoming the New Jersey of the West? Colorado is a top 5 state for its share of outbound moves and is losing older and wealthier households. So yeah, there's less people working. There's less people participating in the labor force. These people are leaving the state of Colorado because they can't afford to live here. January 6, 2026. Once considered a place to run to, not run from, Colorado started giving off a different vibe. It now ranks fifth in the country for its share of outbound moves, according to the country's largest moving company. Repeat, outbound, not inbound. The Una Group companies, parent of United Van Lines and Mayflower, has measured the ratio of inbound moves to outbound moves for states since 1977. And for the vast majority of those years, Colorado has had a higher number of share of moves in than moves out. From 2013 to 2017, not counting 2016, it was a high inbound state with 55% or more of its moves inbound. Quote, Colorado is the first year that 2025 is the first year that Colorado has been listed as a high outbound state since 1990, said Eli Cummings, vice president of the corporate communications at United Van Lines. Colorado is now running with a different crowd demographically. New Jersey leads the country with nearly 70% of its moves outbound. Wow. New York, with its larger and older population and high living expenses, had the second highest outbound ratio of 57.8%. Retirees are a big part of the outbound moves in both states. So people are moving out of Colorado. People can't afford to live here anymore. Yeah, sure, unemployment's down lower because, maybe there's less people working here or saying they're not looking for a job because they left the state. Now, this is a big, I kind of want to finish with this here at CompleteColorado.com, January 6, 2026. Colorado Chamber urges legislature to do no harm. Now, you should be checking out CompleteColorado.com every day. They are fantastic in terms of original reporting, but also sharing links to, including Free State Colorado, but other people from across the state. As the state legislature prepares to convene on January 14th, the Colorado Chamber of Commerce is urging lawmakers to do no harm. The business group's recently released 2026 legislative agenda makes the case, among a host of other priorities, that a growing regulatory burden is hampering economic growth. The chamber last year released a study counting over 200,000 regulations, making Colorado the sixth most regulated state in the nation. Colorado also ranks among the most expensive states as homeownership, cost of living, business, and employment suffer. So interesting stuff there. Let's take a look. This is that report they put out last year, showing that Colorado, just behind New York, Texas, Illinois, New Jersey, and California, is one of the most highest regulated, has the highest number of business regulations in the country. And wow, yeah, New Jersey people are leaving there. New York people are leaving there. We saw in that other article. So it's pretty interesting stuff here. But yeah, Colorado has tons and tons of regulations. By the end of 2024, Colorado has already become the state with the sixth highest number of business restrictions. Using a bottom-up methodology, which accounts for regulations that apply across multiple industries, StratAcumen estimates that the total number of restrictions has reached nearly 200,000, positioning the state as the sixth most regulated in the country. So yeah, you can see why the Chamber of Commerce, why businesses are wary about the future of Colorado. And of course, this has something to do with that lower than expected tax revenue. So this is their report they put out, the Colorado Chamber for 2026 here. Their legislative agenda, which is just starting. So I'm sure all the legislators, all 100 Colorado state legislators, probably got a copy of this 19-page report, really cautioning them to stop attacking businesses, stop attacking the job creators, the employers in our state, right? I mean, that's the big thing. If these Democratic legislators really care about trying to create a better society for working class Coloradans, they would stop going after these businesses. It's crazy, right? So they really, here's kind of what they're hoping to see from the Chamber of Commerce: to expand and strengthen regulatory review process and increase transparency. So really to look at that process in terms of, do these regulations need to go ahead and go by the wayside? Do we need to just repeal them or let them sunset out? Do no harm, no new mandates and regulatory burdens on employers. Recent legislative sessions have brought major structural and regulatory mandates at the state level that are still in their infancy. Several bills have had to undergo additional legislative fixes to clarify or resolve the operational and regulatory issues that come with such new sweeping policies. The Colorado Chamber will oppose any significant new mandates and regulatory burdens on employers to allow the business community to adapt to an already complex state level regulatory climate. I mean, if you're trying to create a small business or a big business here in Colorado and you have to hire somebody or spend all this time and money just dealing with the regulations, that increases your costs. That means maybe you can't necessarily operate in Colorado or hire as many people as you'd like for other parts of it, or expand, do all these other types of things, right? So this is very fascinating stuff. Definitely recommend you check it out. You can read all about this costs to increase the energy costs, energy grid. All of that is going to be a huge issue. But the Colorado Chamber of Commerce here really lays it out. Of course, the labor and employment issue is going to be big. The Labor Peace Act. There's going to be so much to talk about here in 2026. But really wanted to share that with you at all entirely as well. But of course, we looked at that. Common Sense report, and I just wanted to share this last piece. Colorado's Tabor exempt revenue has increased nearly 30% since 1996. So, of course, when people talk about Tabor refunds, when people talk about the burden on businesses and on individuals, you got to talk about fees. Well, that's what I got for you today. Hope you found it interesting. I think this stuff's fascinating. We really look behind the curtain at our fiscal policy here in Colorado and this economic outlook. And there's so much interesting information. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.